People who knew someone who went missing or was murdered. What happened? I had a friend who was murdered/manslaughtered 10 years ago. He was standing in line to get into a local late-night eats place around bar closing time. A guy before him in line has a disagreement with the doorman/bouncer guy. Dude goes home, grabs a shotgun, and returns to exact some type of revenge on the bouncer guy. Only thing is, bouncer guy sees him coming and dodges one way or the other, which left my friend in the line of fire. Never saw coming. 1 second he's waiting for food, and the next he was gone. Next story. I was in 2nd grade when my best friend was murdered by her older brother and stuffed into the freezer. I will never forget the day it happened. We would leave school, and since we lived right next to each other, I would walk her home every day and then run home to my place. That day I walked her home, dropped her off, and went home just like any other day. A couple hours later, every cop and EMT in the town was there. I watched out my window as they wheeled away a 4-foot-tall body in a black bag. I didn't really understand what happened until that Friday. We had an assembly at school to remember her. It's pretty hard to fathom as a 7-year-old why something like this would happen. Hell, 15 years later, and I still can't fathom it. Brother is out of prison now and has his own family, even had his record wiped clean. The mother doesn't blame the son for what happened. It's almost like she never existed at all at this point. I miss you, Samantha. What could have possibly happened for the kid to have his record wiped clean and for the mother to not blame the son? I feel like I'm missing some crucial part of the story. At least, I hope I am. Otherwise, this just doesn't feel right. Next story. When I was a kid, a classmate's cousin's mom went missing. No one really knew where she was. She was just gone. If I remember correctly, it was rumored she left her husband and skipped town. This is weird, because everyone remembered her being really excited about being a mom. No one thought she would leave her daughter behind. Years later, on the poor girl's first communion day, her mom is seen from the mother-in-law's basement window begging for help. The neighbors call the cops, who come with a warrant and find the woman living in the basement. She claimed her mother-in-law had been holding her hostage and forcing her to live off cat food. She was super malnourished, weak, and had to be shielded from the sun as she was escorted out of the house that day. The little girl was escorted to church by 2 cops so she could have her first communion. Next story. I had a babysitter when I was 3 or so whose 21-year-old son was stabbed to death at a bar. My dad said after her son died, she changed and got really withdrawn, and he got worried about my well-being and found another babysitter. I have a lot of memories of her. I remember the cool toys she had, playing in her backyard, her putting a tarp in the back of her truck to build a pool, stuff like that. And then I remember her sitting on the couch and crying a lot, and going with her to visit a graveyard at least weekly, if not daily. I loved going to the graveyard because I liked looking at all the pretty flowers on everyone's gravestones, except for when it rained and I had to wait in the truck while she went out with an umbrella. I hated those days. She took forever and it was boring and I didn't understand why we had to be there. I didn't know she had a son or that he died until my dad told me the story a few years ago. I feel so sad for her now. Next story. My grandpa was murdered. He lived on a country road, so no reason for anyone random to be around. He went to leave for work and was shot in the back as he was going to get in his truck. Perp was believed to be hiding behind a small little log cabin he had just for us grandkids. Then he turned around to be shot again. They got in his truck and drove away. Truck was found just a couple miles away. Didn't take anything or even touch his wallet. 7 years later, and we still don't know who did it. Next story. When organizing a school reunion for a few grades because it was a small school, I googled the name of a guy I was mates with for a while. His name came up as one of the unsolved disappearances for our state. Missing, presumed murdered. I always thought he'd moved on to another school with a little notice, but when he disappeared, he was just 14. No one actually reported him missing at the time. It was 7 years later when the cops worked out that he may have been involved in a bigger situation than he could handle. Next story. When I was 20 years old and living in Phoenix, one of my best friends and I had a falling out. She struggled with addiction and mental illness. Late one night, she came to my door incoherent and high on who knows what. I was furious. We had a huge fight and I told her to never do that again. About 2 weeks later, I received a late-night phone call from another friend. He informed me that some detectives from Santa Monica PD had come to a coffee shop we all frequented to ask questions about her. Turns out her body had been found in an alley. She would have turned 21 the following week. Apparently, she had hitchhiked or taken Greyhound to Santa Monica to visit her cousin not long after our fight. She must have gone out late at night to score some drugs, and that's when she encountered the perp. There were no leads and her case went cold. I was devastated. I went into a tailspin. My life fell apart. I struggled for years to cope with it. My drinking was out of control. I couldn't escape the feeling that I would wake up and realize it was all a terrible dream, or that she would come back and tell me the police made some mistake, that she'd been alive all along. My turning point was deciding to enroll in college. She had been taking a few classes at the local community college right before it happened. I became inspired to graduate and achieve what she didn't live long enough to. When I walked up and received my diploma, I felt like she was graduating with me. 8 years later, a convicted felon on parole was arrested again. DNA evidence from this assault matched a sample taken during her autopsy. He was finally convicted and sentenced to life in prison in 2005. 11 years after the murder. Well, OP, good for you for taking that as a turning point in your own life. You may have gone and done it for her, which is super sweet, but it really did help you out in the long run too. That being said, I'm terribly sorry for your loss, and everyone's in here really. I just can't really come in after every story and say, sorry for your loss. That kind of throws off the flow of things anyway. It's good to hear that he's away forever now, but it's hard not to say 11 years too late, huh? Next story. My manager, whom I had worked with for several years, was murdered by her estranged son. He was released for parole from San Quentin prison and showed up at his mother's doorstep. She apparently refused to let him in, so he broke into her house while she was gone. He attempted to strangle her, then hit her over the head with a hammer until she died. Then he drove around town with her body before dumping her in a septic tank. It was a shock to everyone. She was a very kind woman and only a few months away from retirement. Next story. Went to a buddy's house to pre-drink and go out. Another friend was there with her friend. We got introduced to each other and they both left. She was on the news the next week saying her body was found. She was beaten to death, and the guy and girl who beat her to death threw her body into the river. Another kid who was in my high school science class was recently arrested and given prison time for manslaughter with an attempt to flee the country. Next story. My son's father. We had broken up, and I moved back to my home country to have my son while he remained in the Caribbean. We had been talking about reconciling and him moving here. Last April, on a Friday night, he was at his house when a van with some men in it parked near it, and the men started arguing. He asked the men to leave, and when he went back inside, he was shot in the back. As far as I know, nobody has been arrested. The island he lived on has a high crime rate, so I don't expect his murder to be solved. It's a shame, since when I lived there with him, I always felt safe. But now I'm worried to visit with my son. Yet I still want my son to know that side of his family and his heritage. Next story. One of my better friends from junior high had moved to a different school not too far away in another district. A few years later, he was murdered, literally beaten to death with a frying pan. The suspect called and asked another friend to help dispose of the body, and he refused, left and called the cops. He was charged with murder, but he didn't tell where the remains were until 2 years later. They were found near a place a lot of us went four-wheeling pretty often before they were located. He only got 18 years. Next story. My BFF lived out in the country, so her house was party central on the weekends. Plenty of room, a big fire pit out front, livestock, the works. The neighbor was a nice woman, about our ages. BFF was closer to her than I was, but I always enjoyed her company. My kids had been to her house. She had kiddos of a similar age. It was basically free range. If hers weren't there, they were probably at BFF's. Her husband went on a drug binge, shot, and ended her in the bedroom. Her kids ran to the BFF's place. He evaded the police for almost a day before they got him. Scary made scarier. The weekend before, my kids had been alone with him, as she, BFF, and I ran to the store. He seemed mild-mannered, a bit shy, even funny when he opened up. Just goes to show you never know what happens behind closed doors. Next story. A boy I went to high school with. I knew of him, rather than knowing him personally, from seeing him at school. My high school had a great curriculum for handicapped students, such that out-of-area students with special needs were bussed in. The head special ed teacher also was the drama club director and the GSA club advisor, Gay/Straight Alliance. I was a member of those clubs, so I ran into the special ed students more than the average student. At any rate, I remember this particular young man because he required a motorized chair and a constant aid. He was physically and mentally handicapped. My best friend once found him in the boys' restroom with the aide struggling with the boy who was having an episode, possibly a fall. It stuck out in my mind as being incredibly sad. He graduated in my high school class. Several years later, I was reading the county newspaper and came across his obituary. H. Overdose. How does someone who's unable to use the lavatory without assistance die from an H overdose? He could barely speak coherently. Next story. A girl I knew in college. I met her through fellowship, and she just seemed like a normal, friendly girl who wanted to hang out with people. 4 months later, she was admitted to a mental hospital for her depression treatment. Everyone was quite stunned by this. 2 or 3 weeks later, the nurses found her missing from her room, and there was a long search effort in the area with police, her family, and volunteers. She wasn't found for months, and one day during another search, her mother found her body near a river, roughly 10 miles from the hospital, laying by a tree. No one found out how she had traveled from the hospital to the river, nor for how long she was dead. This happened 6 years ago, and I still see her mom posting on her Facebook page saying how much she misses and loves her. It's sad. Next story. My brother was murdered a few years back. He was involved with bad people, made bad choices, and ended up going execution style by a ditch. Sometimes I get a horrible feeling when I think about how terrified he was in those last moments. He had a 19-year-old guy with him when he met those guys, and supposedly the 19-year-old was murdered first, so he had to know what was next. 3 people got jail time. 1 pleaded guilty and got a plea deal where he could get parole in 20 years. 1 was charged with capital murder and has life without parole. The last one got, I forget what kind of murder charge, but he has the possibility of parole in 20 years. My mom was never the same after. He left behind a son, too. Next story. Not murdered, but attempted murder. A friend of mine who I grew up with in school and sports was stabbed 20+ times by a guy who's trying to steal drugs from his grandmother. The grandmother was slain, but my friend managed to survive by going into shock and simply going to sleep until the next morning. My dad is a cop and was the first one on scene. He didn't recognize my friend because of how covered in blood the kid was. It wasn't until my friend's parents arrived at the scene that he made the connection. Also had a friend from middle school shoot a guy last year. Not sure if he was convicted of murder, but he was selling drugs and making suppressors in his house, so he's gonna be in jail for a long time. I have a strange feeling that the last guy probably will be convicted for murder, mostly the whole shooting a guy thing. As for your other friend, I'm glad he survived, but that sounds horrifically traumatic. I mean, obviously. I just hope he has some semblance of a normal life now. That's really the best you can hope in that sort of situation. Next story. My father was murdered almost 10 years ago. He was leaving a fast food restaurant with my mother and younger brother. He stopped at the counter while mom and brother walked out of the exit. At that time, a guy walked out of the bathroom and shot my dad. He shot a couple of other people too before he took his own life. My father was the only one who died. From what I heard, the guy had a dispute with his girlfriend and intended to end her. When she didn't show up at the restaurant, he decided to shoot the place up. I've actively avoided reading any news about it or really talking to anyone about the details of what happened. I don't know why, I just can't bring myself to. My mom and brother got out unscathed, which I'm thankful for. That whole time in my life is very blurry. All I clearly remember is walking through the backyard to get home after school and seeing all of my extended family at my house. My dad's best friend came out and told us what happened. It took me a couple of days to feel anything or even believe it actually happened. My family still hasn't recovered from this. We're all a mess. Next story. I never knew this woman so much, but I talked to her a couple of times at work. Nothing personal, but some idle smoke break chit-chat. Sometime later, she stopped coming to work. About 2 months later, she's found buried in a shallow grave at a farm 2 towns over. Apparently, she was a drug addict and got into a car with a highly psychopathic dealer in the area. He thought she stole some money and flat out ended her, which didn't happen. He just thought she did. People were devastated at work at the time when it was found out. Next story. 2 people. Same perp. I didn't know either well, but knew their names. Dude's wife was going to divorce him. She was supposed to leave one afternoon, but he came home from work early, catching her with her bags packed. He convinces her to call her sister where she was going, to say that they were going to try and talk and work things out. Then he ends her. About 2 weeks later, a neighbor goes in to check on her, because the husband said she'd been sick and that's why she wasn't going out. The neighbor was too persistent, and the husband ends him too. Like a month later, another neighbor finds their bodies in the woods. Dude confesses everything to the cops. This was like 15 years ago. I wish I could link the article, it was so surreal. Next story. My older brother was murdered. He was a soldier and was driving a Humvee, rare for him because he was a gunner filling in for a tired buddy, that hit an IED. We/the army thought for a long time that they hit a buried IED, but they were actually blown up by a timed IED. Someone watched my brother/his convoy drive up and blew him up on purpose. His body absorbed most of the blast and saved his friends' lives. I was determined not to be that girl whose brother was murdered when I met people, so I used to not mention it if they asked if I had siblings. But I became unhealthy keeping things in for so long, and now I tell people. It makes innocent get-to-know-you conversations get deep real fast, but I loved my brother, and I would rather let people know. It also happened while I was in high school and caused deep-rooted pain, so it sort of shaped who I am today. Next story. Many years ago, a client of mine was murdered by a coordinated and clearly professional hit just a few hours after I left his place. I found out about it the next morning when my mom called me, having seen it in the newspaper. He apparently had been involved in the drug cartel. He had quit, but didn't know you don't get to quit the cartel. Next story. A girl I went to middle school and high school with was hitchhiking at a bus stop. Small, remote BC town. Everyone did this. I hitched everywhere I went. The bus only came through every hour or so. Disappeared off the face of the map back in 2001. The worst thing is, her brother drove past her just before she got picked up by whoever did this. But he didn't stop because he was late for something. Her poor family. She's still never been found. It's pretty common knowledge who did it, but he knows the legal system well. He lawyered up and wouldn't let the cops search his remote property. They didn't have anything concrete to tie him to it, so there was nothing they could do. There's pretty persistent rumors about him, though. The girl's boyfriend at the time was a friend of mine. We were street kids together in the nearest city. The cops looked at him, but he's innocent. He was clean at the time, doing really well, but after that just kinda threw up his hands and said, "Screw it," went back to using. He's not doing too well last time I talked to him. I also knew a woman who worked the streets who got murdered by a John and dumped in the woods. Hikers found her body. This was about 2003 or so. Nobody found her murderer either. We scored together a few times, but I didn't know her super well, just enough to say hi to. Same with the first girl, we weren't super close. She was a grade or two younger than me. We were both into metal, and our paths would have probably eventually crossed more, but I stopped going to that school mid-year the same year she started. But I had a lot of friends who were very affected by her loss. I was working at a gas station in town when it happened, and her parents were regulars there. I had a few long listen/hug sessions with her mom. I can't even imagine. She was so beautiful and nice, too. Such a shame. I can't imagine how truly infuriating it would be for everyone to know who did it and to not be able to do anything about it, because there's no concrete evidence. And yet you're so sure that this guy is walking around, having a life, being normal, after having committed an atrocious act. I'm so sorry, OP. Next story. Lots of people, but one that stands out is my Aunt Tanya. She was with her abusive husband, and one night they were fighting bad. He was beating her pretty badly, and he said he was going to end her. So she ran to her elderly neighbor's home, and they let her in. She ran to the bathroom to hide. He came in their house and shot both of the elderly couple dead, and shot at their granddaughter who was asleep on the couch but missed. He went to the bathroom and shot her too. He's now in prison for life. Next story. Not someone I know personally, but a coworker at my job my mom worked at a long time ago when I was 3 or 4. Woman was working the overnight shift alone, which was the norm, and came up missing. No sign of struggle. Her purse and coat left at the store. She had the keys to the store on her when her body was found. No signs she was bound, but her cause of death was being shot. As far as I know, no one was ever arrested for the crime. The suspects were her boyfriend and her husband. Both supposedly had strong alibis. Needless to say, afterwards, all employees refused to work the overnight shift alone, and so forth. 2 people worked the overnight shift. My mom still quit not too long after. If there's ever a sign to get out of a job, yeah, fair enough. I would leave too and not look back. Anyway, that's the last story for today. Sorry it was such a downer. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.